What's your family's dark secret? Story 1. My paternal grandma got pregnant with my dad when she was about 17, in a small town in northern Louisiana. She claimed my grandpa was abusive, so she and her sisters took off for New Mexico when she was 19, and my dad was a little under 2 years old. On the way, she unexpectedly delivered my uncle, who bears little resemblance to my dad, even though they obviously have the same mom. She then very openly carried on an affair with her boss, who was in his 60s, until she met my step-grandpa. He was a great guy and raised my dad and uncle as if they were his own. As the story goes, my step-grandpa was overjoyed when my grandma got pregnant with his baby. But my aunt ended up bearing a remarkable resemblance to grandma's boss. The boss's wife showed up to the happy home with a gun and a checkbook. She said she was going to use one or the other to make my grandma go away. So, in about 1961, my grandma received a check for something like $10,000, and she and my step-grandpa bought a brand new house. All good, right? Nope. Grandma had countless more affairs, got married 2 more times, and my step-grandpa, feeling so betrayed after raising all 3 kids, ended up taking his own life. Grandma then tried to swoop in and take over his Social Security survivor benefits somehow. Right before she passed away a few years ago, she kicked out her last husband, emptied their joint savings, and took off to Arkansas with my aunt and cousins. Right after I was born, my real grandpa showed up on our doorstep with literal boxes full of letters, birthday cards, and newspaper clippings of my dad's activities, like sports and earning his PhD. My grandma had gone through all of them, taken out the cash and checks, and just to be cruel, returned the remnants. Turns out, my grandpa was a great guy, never abusive, and he missed his son deeply. He had always worked blue-collar jobs and couldn't really leave town. Grandma had actually bolted when she was 19 because she had an affair with the local Buick salesman, and his wife showed up with a gun, no checkbook. Story 2. I've shared this story before. My mom's relationship with my dad began after her divorce. She had 2 kids from her first marriage, a son and a daughter. When she started dating my dad, she was pregnant with my older sister. During that time, my dad molested my oldest sister. As soon as it happened, she found out. He tearfully confessed when confronted, apologized, and begged for forgiveness. She forgave him, but he continued to molest my sister. Had my mom done the right thing, called the police, or even just left him, I would never have been born. Instead, I became the product of a man with serious issues, someone who terrorized our family until my mom finally left him when I was 7. My oldest sister is deeply traumatized. She's been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or possibly narcissistic personality disorder. She has never had a healthy relationship with anyone. She's abusive toward her siblings, and none of us maintain real contact with her. I found all of this out 17 years ago. It's strange to think I shouldn't exist, but that idea doesn't really trouble me. I try to be a good person. I'm definitely not my dad. For context, only one person ever asked, "No, my oldest sister is not my mom. She was only 7 or 8 when I was born." To those offering support, thank you, but I'm okay. I'm a happy person. I do deal with anxiety sometimes, but it's mostly because of the state of the world, not my family background. I work in education. I understand the statistical improbability of any person's existence. That I technically wouldn't exist had my mom made better choices doesn't bother me. I'm here, and I try to be a good person. Everyone should, no matter how they came into the world. Here's one story about my family that doesn't change anything, but might offer some sense of closure. When I got married, my sisters were my wife's maids of honor. My brother was our photographer. As the wedding approached, My oldest sister started acting erratically. She got into a fight with my brother, which wasn't unusual, and issued an ultimatum. It was either him or her. She did the same thing about my dad. She didn't want to be in the same room as him. So, I called her. We had a talk. I told her directly. This was my wedding. It was going to go how I wanted it to, and she wasn't going to make ultimatums. If she said it was either her or my brother, then she'd be the one out. When I made that clear, she immediately stopped complaining about my brother's presence. That's because, as I said before, she no longer has the emotional power to hurt me. I don't tolerate her behavior. As for her ultimatum about my dad, well, having him there and her skipping it because of that felt too much like letting the bad guys win. I told her I had no problem uninviting him, and that's what I did. Afterward, when I occasionally saw him, he would complain. And when he did, I told him, "You're lucky we have any kind of relationship at all. You don't deserve one. I wouldn't push it." He stopped. That was it. My dad destroyed a life and doesn't deserve any reward for it. As for my sister, the one whose life was destroyed, she's now in her 40s. I know people can get help. If she ever decides to do that, I'll be there. But I can't force her. Maybe someday. But I'm not counting on it. Story 3. I don't really think this is a dark secret, but it's something I didn't find out until I was an adult. Mostly because my grandma doesn't like talking about it. So, I think it counts. When I was going through some of my grandma's old things after my mother passed away, I found a few old photographs of a baby. Not my mom, because my mom had dark, almost black hair at birth, and this baby was blonde, along with a birth certificate for someone named Francesco, my mom's maiden name. I asked my grandma about it, and at first she didn't really want to tell me. I gave her some space, and she must have decided I deserved to know. Or maybe she was just tired of holding the secret, because she eventually told me. Francesco, who they called Frank, was my grandma's son. He was my mom's younger brother by a couple of years. Apparently, when Frank was 3, my grandma's ex-husband kidnapped him, and she never saw him again. Her ex-husband, my biological grandfather, though I don't consider him one, the least of which is because I never met him, was involved with organized crime, and it's suspected that he took Frank with him back to Sicily, though nobody is really sure. My grandma believes he would have taken my mom too, if she hadn't been sick and in the hospital for tonsillitis at the time. It kind of gave me some clarity as to why that side of the family is so secretive about things. I didn't even know my mom had been married before my dad until I was a teenager, but it also makes me feel really, really sorry for my grandma. Story 4. I'm pretty sure my uncle was in the Hells Angels, or at least affiliated with them. His funeral was something else. The procession to the cemetery was loud and proud. Edit. I'll give a little more detail about him since this thread got so much attention. I've been told he was a great mechanic, even as a teenager. There's a story about how he took a car completely apart and scattered the parts all over my grandmother's backyard. She told him she'd give him $100 if he could put it back together and get it running. And he did. This was in the late 60s or early 70s, so $100 went a bit further back then. He even owned his own repair shop at one point. He was a motorcycle drag racer, and apparently quite popular with women. At his funeral, there was a long line of ex-girlfriends who came to cry over him. All of my uncles were bikers, but I think he was the only one who truly became the outlaw type. I guess you could call him the black sheep of the family, but he was loved by everyone. I only saw him during holidays, and I was only 12 when he passed away, so I didn't get to know him well. My mother would tell me stories about how he used to torment her as a kid, like hiding under her bed until she fell asleep, then yanking her off, or hiding outside her window and shooting her with a BB gun. Story 5. My great-grandfather owned a large farm in Alabama. He was around 6 feet 6 inches. incredibly muscular, and very fit. He allowed black families who worked for him to live in homes on his property. He was a strict, old-school German man, but he tried to be fair. As long as there was mutual respect, you took care of the home you lived in, and you worked when you were supposed to. He worked multiple wives to death. He tried to take care of the people who worked for him, but very often he'd pay the male workers, and they'd immediately blow all their money on gambling, drinking, and getting into trouble. He'd regularly have to go retrieve them from the local jail. Since they wasted their family's money, he often provided supplies and food for the wives and children, deducting the cost from their wages before giving them any cash. My dad had to live with him for a year when his own father lost an arm in an accident. During that time, my dad fell off a horse and broke his arm. Instead of helping right away, his grandfather beat him for being clumsy before finally calling a doctor. One winter, some of the fence posts went missing, and cattle were wandering free. He found out that one of the workers, drunk and cold, had stolen the posts for firewood. My great-grandfather beat him to death in front of the house for being a lazy thief and told the family to leave the property. Another time, some equipment had been damaged, so he lined up the workers to find out who was responsible. My dad witnessed this while staying there. One man, clearly the one who did it, mouthed off, said a few sarcastic things, and then squared up to him. My great-grandfather calmly reached out and broke the man's neck like it was nothing. Then he told the others to get back to work and to be more careful. He later called the sheriff to pick up the body and told him what happened. Back then, killings like that were often seen as justified, so there was no court involvement. It was a totally different time and world. Obviously, a lot more happened, but my dad, who was a tough man himself, never talked about his grandfather. And on the rare occasions he did, you could still hear the fear in his voice like he was talking about the devil. Story 6. My great-great-great-grandfather, Mike, was a complete monster. He and his wife, Mary, had 10 children, 9 girls and a boy. While she was pregnant with their 11th child, he kicked her and broke her back while they were outside in the middle of winter. He then went inside and left her lying there all night. The baby was born during the night and tragically froze to death. Mary was bedridden for the rest of her life. Mike used this as an opportunity to begin abusing 6 of their daughters. The 2 oldest had already left home, and the youngest was still a baby. This went on for 4 years, until he decided the youngest was old enough to target. One of the other girls, 19-year-old Ida, stepped in to protect her. He told Ida she could save her sister by satisfying him instead. Afterwards, Ida told her mother, who refused to believe it, and slapped her. Mike punished Ida by forcing her brother and sisters to each stab her once. A nun had heard about a local farmer with a disabled wife and 7 children. By then, the 3rd oldest daughter had also left, and decided to check in to see if she could help. She arrived while Ida was still recovering from the stabbing and noticed the clear signs of abuse. She helped the girls who were being harmed escape by finding them jobs with room and board, leaving only the boy and the youngest daughter behind. In retaliation, Mike arranged for the nun to be murdered and her body dumped in the river. My great-great-grandmother tried to tell people her father was responsible for the disappearance, but he was well-connected and admired. He was a highly skilled musician and reportedly knew Ulysses S. Grant personally. She was only a 9-year-old girl, and no one listened. All of this was kept quiet because it was embarrassing and scandalous. Most of the siblings never spoke about it. Ida told her husband and children that her scars were from tumor surgeries. Very few people know the truth. Story 7. My grandma always told me that my grandpa's mother died when he was very young, and that his father couldn't handle raising him, so he was raised by non-relatives. My sister and I did some digging, and it turns out our great-grandmother was only 15 when our grandpa was born, and our great-grandfather was in his late 20s. From what we can tell, Her family forced her to marry her abuser. She didn't die when my grandpa was a child. She actually passed away when my dad was a teenager. She had simply left her unhappy situation when my grandpa was a kid and never came back. His dad ended up abandoning him, too. He left him on a neighbor's porch in the middle of the night, and later had 2 more children with another significantly younger woman. I think my grandma told us that my great-grandmother had died to make my grandpa seem more sympathetic, because he was mean, and none of us grandkids liked being around him. My grandpa also continued the cycle of abandoning children. He got his first wife pregnant just before leaving for military training. When he returned, he denied that the child, who had even been named after him, was his and kicked both of them out. My grandma knew the child was his and used to secretly send the first wife money whenever she could without my grandpa finding out. He tried to do the same thing to my grandma when their first child was born, but her family literally held him at gunpoint until he signed the birth certificate. He accepted their other children. My dad was his favorite and the only son he acknowledged, but he always claimed that my uncle wasn't his. None of his children with my grandma ever met their older half-brother or his kids. My grandma once told me she had hated her husband for almost their entire marriage, but didn't know what else to do except stay with him. It broke my heart to know she spent so much of her life so unhappy. She's such a sweet woman and didn't deserve the way he treated her. Story 8. Both sides of my family have dark secrets, and just straight-up secrets. It started with my aunt winning the lottery in the early 90s, $3.8 million. But behind her perfect white picket fence, she was already deep into drug use. She did nearly every drug until she met her best friend, and the reason she went to prison, crystal meth. She was eventually raided for making and distributing it in her home while her kids were there. She spent all the money, served her time, and now lives in a double-wide trailer. Pretty much a real-life version of Breaking Bad. My dad had serious gambling and drinking problems. My parents would leave us in the family's casino hotel room at bedtime and spend the entire night gambling. I only recently found out that my dad gambled away the college funds for me and my siblings. That also explains why we had to move from a big house to a much smaller one when I was in elementary school. We lost that house due to my dad's reckless investments in the stock market. My mom, however, is actually amazing. She gave up her career for us kids and has always done her best. Not every decision she made was perfect, but who can say theirs are? That said, pulling me, then 15 years old, out of math class one day just to tell me she wanted me to use the bat in the trunk to confront my dad wasn't one of her better moments. Grandpa number 1 destroyed his family by having an affair with the marriage counselor he and my grandmother were seeing. He also had a secret child and paid the woman to stay quiet. That didn't last, and we eventually found out I have an aunt who's my age. Grandpa number 2 had more straightforward secrets. He worked for Skunk Works Lockheed on the SR-71 project. He was a strange, brilliant man, and honestly not the nicest person. He never attended a single birthday or holiday in my life. I'm sure he had plenty of secrets we'll never know, and that's just a small sampling of the skeletons in my family's closet. Story 9. I have an uncle who's lived his entire life in an institution. When my grandfather died, the obituary didn't mention his existence. Only my father and his twin sister were listed as children. Edit. He has the mental capacity of about a 3-year-old. My grandfather visited him every week, and after he died, my father took that over. He's always been well cared for. It's just something nobody ever talks about. It was simply understood that when my grandfather passed, the story would be father of 2 instead of 3. My father's mother had mental illness. She was given a bunch of heavy medications that likely caused her first son's severe mental impairment. A couple of years later, when she had twins, My father was born with a cleft palate, not visibly disfiguring, but it took him a long time to learn to speak properly, also likely caused by the drugs. From what I understand, those medications didn't really help, just sedated her. When my father and his sister were 12, their mother took her own life. My grandfather was completely unprepared for life as a single parent, and her side of the family basically vanished after her death, never checking in to see if the kids were okay. A year later, my grandfather remarried a wonderful woman, who I always considered my grandmother. I was 5 or 6 before I learned she was technically my step-grandmother. Her own kids were already grown and out of the house, and she stepped in and saved the family, treating my dad and aunt like they were her own. So it was a mostly happy ending to a sad story. But the living reminder of those dark times was never mentioned in conversation. The obituary read, "Devoted father to X and Y, loving stepfather to A and B, and grandfather to," with no acknowledgement of his oldest son. Story 10. My great-grandfather was reportedly a paranoid schizophrenic. He had to drop out of school in the 1920s to care for his mentally ill mother, which caused him to develop intense resentment toward women. In the 1930s, he married my great-grandmother, who was around 14 at the time. I'll spare the full details, but after they had children, he became increasingly hateful and abusive toward her. There's a story from that time when my great-grandmother, terrified for her life, took a giant teddy bear their daughter had won at the fair and sewed his shotgun inside it so he'd never find it. But that wasn't his only gun. One day, he called a family meeting. He gathered my great-grandmother and all 4 of their children, who were around middle or early high school age at the time, into the living room and started ranting about things that didn't make sense. He then shot my great-grandmother and turned the gun on himself, taking his own life in front of all their children. My great-grandmother survived. Doctors said if the bullet had been half an inch higher, she would have been permanently paralyzed. She's had severe back problems ever since. It took years for us to get the full story. You're the first people outside the family to hear it. Also worth noting, back then, there were no professional cleaning services for things like this, so not only did the children witness the tragedy, but they were the ones who had to scrub their father's blood and remains off the walls afterward. So yeah, that's our family's darkest secret. Story 11. My aunt passed away 2 years ago. We barely spoke over the last decade. She had a PhD and was very well known in her field. We assumed she had just gotten absorbed in her work. But no, turns out she had been addicted to OxyContin the entire time. She overdosed, and her organs shut down. My mom is bedridden due to an inherited pain disorder, so she couldn't attend the funeral. It was thousands of miles away, and traveling is too painful for her. When I was nearby, I went to visit my uncle, the husband of my aunt who passed. For some reason, he took that opportunity to tell me that my grandmother, the mother of my mom and aunt, had been forced into child prostitution in the South. When she tried to escape, she was chased down with hounds and brought back to the estate for more abuse. My aunt had told her husband this, but my mom has no idea. With my dad gone, after crashing our car and leaving my mom with a severe brain injury, and everyone else my mom once knew now gone from cancer, I will never, ever tell her. Story 12. Not my family. My godmother's. This happened in L.A. in the early 1980s. My godmother desperately wanted more children. She had a son, but couldn't conceive again. Her husband's, my godfather's sister, was in her early 20s and became pregnant out of wedlock, which was very scandalous at the time. My godmother saw her opportunity. She essentially coerced her sister-in-law into giving up the child as soon as it was born. When it came time to deliver, my godfather pretended to be the father, and my godmother instructed her sister-in-law to check into the hospital under my godmother's name. As a result, my godparents' names are listed on the child's birth certificate. It was a sad situation for the child. Growing up, everyone knew the secret. Mean cousins would whisper things and tease her about not really being my godparents' child, but no one ever directly told her the truth. Eventually, the child, now an adult, confronted my godmother and was able to reconnect with her birth mother. It's a heartbreaking story all around. Story 13. Oh, there are tons, but I'll only tell the most recent one. My sister-in-law abuses my brother. She's punched him, smashed breakable items over his head, and almost ran him over during a fight. He left her for about 6 months, but then he moved back in after she started acting like she was going to change and take couples therapy seriously. Shocker, she didn't. She's a serial cheater and probably has some sort of cluster B personality disorder. But she's the most self-absorbed person I've ever met. Her family seems to pretend she does nothing wrong, and my brother won't talk to me anymore because I won't pretend everything is okay with her. Oh, and when I bought Christmas presents for my family and didn't get anything for her, why would I? She's made it clear she dislikes me. She had a hissy fit like a 5-year-old. Never mind that she didn't get anything for me or my husband at all, and that she had to throw her fit on my dad's birthday, who passed 2 years ago. My family's pain means nothing if she doesn't get the gift she feels she deserves. I don't play games with abusers because you'll always be set up to lose. My brother has internalized her hatred to the point where he thinks he deserves it. I hope he wakes up from the fog someday, especially before he ruins his relationship with his daughter. Man or woman, no one should get a free pass to keep hurting people. Story 14. This will probably be buried, but here goes. Context: I'm female and 9 years younger than my sister, so I only lived through the aftermath of this and was told many of the details as I got older and could understand them. My father molested my half-sister, different dads, from when she was very young until she was a mid-teenager. When it finally came to light, it turned into a he said, she said situation in terms of the police being able to prosecute. My sister, in an attempt to prove she wasn't lying, recorded an instance on tape and planned to take it to the police. Here's where it gets worse. My father was the sole provider for our family of 6. My mother was terrified of us ending up homeless or having our futures destroyed if our father went to jail. When she found out about the tape, instead of turning it in, she burned it. My parents did separate, and the abuse obviously stopped. My mom would not allow him near my sister again, but he was never prosecuted or charged with anything that would put him on a registry. Instead, the whole situation was covered up, and it was explained to the younger kids, myself included, that my father was a S addict, because apparently that's more acceptable than predator. We were also told to never speak of it to anyone. It's a family issue. No one needs to know. That left a lasting trauma I only recently began to process. My parents are still married and living a luxurious retired life. I keep low contact with them for a variety of reasons, only one of which is the above. My sister, who is now living a happy and healthy life, raising a family of her own, has zero contact with our mother. For the record, and because I'm sure people will wonder, I was never touched or mistreated by my father. I have a complicated perspective about all of this because he's been nothing but decent to me personally. That obviously doesn't excuse what he did, but I'll figure out how to handle that with my therapist. Story 15. My grandpa embezzled a ton of money from a utility company he worked for on the east coast of the U.S. back in the 1930s. His job was to buy up land from farmers for utility poles. He'd report buying a piece of land for $2,000 when it might have only cost $500. Eventually, he got caught and was wanted by the police. He had a wife and family at the time, so he decided to skip town and head west. When he got there, he found a wallet in a cab and decided to steal the person's last name. He changed his name, married my grandma, and had 4 more kids. He never contacted his first family again, and my dad has technically been living under a fake last name for 70 years. My dad eventually tracked down his original family, who had never known what happened to their father, and told them about the rest of his life. He's kept in touch with them ever since. He was already very old when he met my grandma. I'm only 31, and my biological grandfather was born in the 1800s. Story 16. I am the first generation on my paternal side to be born in the U.S. My father and grandparents fled Italy in late 1944, about 6 or 7 months before Mussolini was, let's say, brought to justice. It was assumed they were the first members of the family to have emigrated. Our family name is quite rare in Italy, all of us originating from a small town called L'Aquila, which you may remember from the devastating 2009 earthquake that made international headlines. Flashback to 1909. My great-uncle, we'll call him Erminio, left L'Aquila and his family to move to Chile in an attempt to take advantage of the gold rush. The gold rush had actually been in decline for 3 or 4 years by then, but I assume he was either chasing a dream or deliberately misleading his family. He kept in touch via occasional letters for about a year and then disappeared, eventually presumed dead. In 1977, my grandfather, while doing genealogical research, discovered a bank certificate issued by the bank he worked for to someone with our last name. Because our name is so rare, it clearly had to be a relative. He was baffled. He was sure no relative had ever been to the U.S. He phoned some cousins and wrote letters, but no one in Italy could explain it. So he sent a letter to the account holder at the address on record, a small town in Tennessee. A few weeks later, he got a response. The letter was from a man we'll call Michael, who said he was the son of a man named Erminio, who had died when he was young and living in Iowa. He included a phone number, and my grandfather called him immediately. Michael said he was one of 2 children, though they were estranged, and that he was very young when his mother, who had since passed, took him to Tennessee. He recalled maybe living in a town called Wellsburg or Wellburg, but couldn't remember many details. So my grandfather called the county seat of Grundy County, Iowa, where Wellsburg is located, and requested a death record search for Erminio. Sure enough, they found one. From there, the information snowballed. To keep it moderately short, Erminio had lied. He never intended to go to Chile. He mailed letters to an associate in Chile, who then forwarded them to his wife and children in Italy. He had actually gone to Philadelphia, where he was arrested for fraud. Charges were dropped. He showed up in Chicago in 1910, where he applied to become a police officer, but was rejected for general immorality. In early 1911, he was in the news again for a scandalous divorce from a woman we'll call Martha Smith, and was subsequently run out of town. In 1916, he was elected mayor of a small town in Missouri, but lasted just over a year after it came out that he'd had an affair with a married woman, who happened to be the daughter-in-law of a state senator. Facing disgrace and poverty, Erminio volunteered for service in World War I. He survived the war, returned to the United States, and settled in Wellsburg, Iowa. He lived there for several years in unstable employment, eventually dying by suicide in November 1924. In total, he fathered 7 children with 4 different women, served in World War I, was arrested at least twice, served as a mayor, and all the while was presumed dead in Chile by his wife and children in Italy. He was definitely a scoundrel, but I have to admit, I kind of admire his nerve. Story 17. Throwaway account created for this. My great-grandma had an affair with her next-door neighbor in the 1920s. The result of that affair was my grandmother. She was adopted out, with a piano and money for ballet and elocution lessons, plus piano lessons. The man who was my great-grandfather ended up marrying another woman, and went on to start one of the largest and most successful companies in my country. It's now publicly traded and a household name. He was knighted. The family is extremely well known. One is even a dame. Several books have been written about my great-grandfather, and places and buildings bear his name. Fast forward to today. My husband does contract work for another company, and it turns out the guy who owns it is my fourth cousin. We share the same great-grandfather. They're all extremely wealthy. We have no plans to say anything. I think they'd be horrified. I don't think we'd fit the image the family tries to project to the public, media, and the industries they're connected to. We still have the piano. Story 18. As I've gotten older, I'm 22 now, my mom has started confiding in me more. She talks to me like a friend. She told me that when my oldest brother, who is 6 years older than me, was a newborn, my dad just left to be with another woman, without saying a word. He moved in with her and left my mom completely alone with a newborn. His parents were furious, especially since they loved my mom. She said he was gone for about a month. Then one day, he just called her and said he wanted to come home. And she let him. They haven't had a problem with loyalty since. You'd never know it now, nearly 3 decades later. My parents are inseparable and never fight. My dad is the kindest man I've ever known. He gives the best advice and raised us to be good, loyal partners in relationships, and just good people overall. Sorry, it's not really a dark story, but it is something only she and I know. She didn't want me to tell my siblings because she said I was the only one mature enough, even though I'm the youngest. She didn't want their image of their dad ruined. But what about my image of my dad? Oh well. Story 19. There is a legend in the family that during the 12th century, the brothers by this name were very clannish and constituted a strong band of valiant men, able and ready to defend their rights with their own good swords. A jealousy of the most bitter kind broke out between them and another family equally renowned for combat prowess. On one occasion, the family name family received an invitation to a great feast, where it was proposed they would come to a final settlement of the feud between these rival parties. They accepted, though they suspected some treachery. The secret was discovered beforehand, and a plan was arranged to meet it. The feast began, and in the middle of it, the host's servants placed upon the table 3 boars' heads. This was the signal for the attempted extermination of the family name family. However, they quickly rallied to a fortified corner of the room and, acting in self-defense, turned the plot with deadly effect upon their opponents. This tradition has passed down through the family and may account for the boars' heads that appear on the family coat of arms. The motto, which in English means most terrible at bay, was Latinized as in extremis terribilis. Although it preserves the referenced legend, it is of little historical value, as few, if any, Dutch families still retain a motto, even if it had been hereditary to those who first adopted it. It is understood the motto is not typically given with the coat of arms in Holland. Story 20. My great-grandmother is 103 years old. Last summer, my family began a quest to trace our ancestry as far back as possible. We figured that since she's still alive and mentally sharp, she'd be a great resource for our search. We were sadly mistaken. My great-grandmother has changed her name upwards of 4 times that we know of. On the various legal documents she's listed in, her name appears with slight variations, for example, Mary versus Marie. We located familial records for my grandmother and great-aunt. They each have multiple siblings they never knew about, different fathers and mothers with slightly different names. Even my great-grandmother's last name is spelled differently on each birth certificate. Of course, my great-grandmother claims it's all inaccurate and says we're digging too much and making a big deal out of some simple paperwork errors. We don't know why she feels the need to conceal her identity to this day. Also, unrelated, but before she sold her home and moved into assisted living, she told us she had hidden a large sum of money in the walls of her house. So there's that. Story 21. Super late to the comments, but here goes. My father-in-law, we'll call him Juan, has a history of abuse, particularly toward my mother-in-law, Laura, and their 2 children. Years later, Juan had neck surgery and began taking heavy pain medication, becoming dependent on them. As time passed, he became increasingly unstable and abusive. In one disturbing incident, Juan researched how many pills it would take to nearly end his life, and took that amount in a dramatic attempt to stop Laura from leaving. Over the next 10 to 15 years, several suicide attempts and other chaotic events occurred. Eventually, Laura divorced him and left with the 2 kids. My wife was about 15, and her brother, Todd, was around 13. Juan's parents refused to believe he could do anything wrong and blamed Laura entirely. After the divorce, Juan moved back in with his parents, where he remains to this day at 42 years old. He hasn't worked in years, pays no rent, and lives off disability benefits, perpetually playing the victim. Todd bounced between both parents over the years, but preferred Juan, who used his disability checks to bribe him to stay. Despite Laura being a loving and stable parent, Juan allowed underage drinking and claimed, "I take care of him more than she does. He's old enough to make his own choices." The abuse continued. Even though we live 8 hours away, Juan constantly harasses my wife and me. He sends apology texts, followed by insults and hateful messages like, "I should have had Laura get an abortion with you. You're a terrible wife." It's non-stop harassment. Then came the worst moment. On Todd's birthday, while still living with Juan, he called my wife in a panic, barely able to speak. After calming him for nearly an hour, he revealed that Juan had gotten him intoxicated and then violated him. From the way he sobbed and the tone of his voice, there was no doubt he was telling the truth. We told Laura, who was shocked, but immediately offered to fly Todd across the country to live with her and her husband. Todd agreed, but once Juan found out we knew, he escalated. He began calling and texting us relentlessly again. We blocked his number. He got new ones. In one voicemail he said, "Todd seduced me. I couldn't be responsible for what I did while drunk." He added, "Todd was drunk. He's to blame." I feel violated. More lies and harassment. Nearly a year later, my wife and I have a 3-month-old son, and Juan wants to be a part of our lives and his grandsons. Todd is in therapy and now lives with his mom and stepdad. Juan's parents still refuse to believe he's capable of wrongdoing and claim Todd seduced him. Our Juan would never do such a thing. So, we've cut off Juan's parents too. They became hateful and started harassing us, so we blocked them as well. Story 22. Grew up without ever meeting my birth father or his side of the family. My mom told me all about them and how bad they were. I knew I had a sister by him and another woman, but didn't reach out to them until after his death. I have a good relationship with my half-sister and cousins who turned out better than the generation before. A few years ago, I did an Ancestry.com DNA kit, and last year I noticed a first cousin pop up whose name I didn't recognize. I reached out to him, and he told me he had been adopted at birth and was looking for his biological family. Doing the math, he couldn't have been from my mom's side. She was 8 at his birth and was the oldest sibling. After some investigating, we found out he was the son of my father's sister. Turns out she got pregnant and gave birth at 16 and didn't tell anyone. He is one of the most pleasant people I know. Very loving and kind. I got the chance to meet him not long after we started exchanging messages. Sadly, his birth mother passed a few years back, so he never got the chance to meet her. Story 23. My grandfather used to drive my best friend and me to school and back. We lived fairly close to each other. Both of our parents worked full-time, and my grandfather was retired, so we all thought it would be a good arrangement. My grandfather ended up harming my best friend. I tried to stop it, but he was always stronger and more cunning than me. Once I told my mother, it stopped. No one in my family, besides me and my mom, knows about it. A couple of years later, I was helping my grandmother pack up his belongings after his death. On some level, I hoped to find some sort of written apology or confession, but I never did. What I did find, however, was evidence that my grandfather had multiple mistresses and children outside the marriage. I also found letter after letter written by my grandmother, confronting him about his infidelity. They were married and lived together until his death, but I guess my grandma could never bring herself to confront him directly. I've never told anyone about what I found. My grandfather was a terrible person, and all his children hated him. As a teenager, I thought he was just misunderstood and trusted him. I'll never make that mistake again. He was a high school teacher and moved the family from boarding school to boarding school every few years. He and my grandmother used to be guardians at those schools. They would brag that they were skilled at working with troubled kids, as those were the types of schools they worked at. I don't know how many other girls he hurt over the years. My grandfather is gone now, and my best friend moved away shortly after everything happened. Her parents wouldn't even allow me to visit her. She seems happy now. She's married and has a baby. I feel like I'm the one left with the secrets and the trauma. All I want is to have a good life. Story 24. So, story time. Last November, I did a 23andMe test. A few days ago, I decided to go through the results again. I noticed a section labeled Possible DNA Relatives. I clicked on it, and it told me I had 8 possible half-siblings, which I initially thought had to be a glitch. As far as I knew, my parents had no other children, and they were definitely my parents. Curious, I messaged some of the supposed half-siblings. One of them found me on Facebook and reached out. She told me we shared a father and that we were conceived via a sperm donor. I was completely confused and assumed it had to be some big mistake. I reached out to my mom, and she initially danced around the topic, trying to deny it. But as I kept talking to my half-siblings, the facts became undeniable. My mom had always told me she had trouble conceiving. If this were a glitch in 23andMe, there's no way I'd be connected to 8 different people. Scrolling through pictures of my half-siblings, I realized I looked like them. I went back through my 23andMe results and realized they didn't align with my dad's heritage at all. I called my mom and told her it was undeniable, and that I wasn't angry. She admitted that they had mixed donor sperm with my father's, and she was never sure which one worked. The man I called my father passed away when I was 19, so I'll never know his side of the story. But it turns out my biological father is still alive, which is a lot to process. I also have 18 half-siblings around the world. 19 if you include my younger sister, who I always thought was my full sibling. I'm still processing all of this. Nothing's changed, but at the same time, everything has. Story 25. As told by my mother, my great-great-grandfather came from a family of some substance in rural West Virginia. He was educated and became, for a time, a schoolmaster. He fell in love and married a student much younger than he was, 15 years old or so, I believe, and who was disapproved of by the family, for cause, as it happens. She came from a much poorer background, and, given subsequent events, I have heard relatives say she had an evil streak. My great-great-grandfather was disinherited following the wedding and became poor, though he did own property for farming. Somehow, and it has been suggested to me that it was through fraud and scheming on the part of his brothers and father, my great-great-grandfather ended up in an insane asylum, where he quickly became ill and died, and on the grounds of which he is buried. I have seen the grave and the records for his involuntary commitment at the behest of his brothers and father, so I know that this much is true, though the rest I have only from the testimony of relatives. Sometime during his confinement, or after his death, his wife abandoned her young children. There were 4, and the youngest, Jack, was an infant, on the family farm. For this she is not fondly remembered in the family, but I wonder if perhaps she was not as evil as family memory holds her to be. By all accounts, she was only in her early 20s, on a farm far from home or help, which she probably could not work alone. With 4 children she was too poor to support. It was wrong, no doubt, to abandon them, but perhaps it was more an act of panic or despair or escape than heartless evil, as the family tells it. Though who can know the motives of people so long dead? The children lived alone for some period before being discovered by a traveling salesman, who brought them to the attention of the authorities. After this, the oldest son, my great-grandfather Robert, was adopted by his mother's family, who I am told wanted him as a laborer and rejected his 2 less useful sisters and infant brother. The 2 sisters were adopted by other families. The baby brother was actually adopted by a relative on his father's side. Many years passed, and Robert became a man who left to fight in the Second World War. By this point, he had lost contact with his siblings, but managed to find his oldest sister and communicate with her through the mail. Though they had not seen each other since they were children, he sent much of the money he was paid during the war to her for safekeeping and, I am told, to keep it out of the possession of his mother's family, whom he distrusted. When the war ended, Robert returned, found his oldest sister, and together they set out with his war savings to try and find their 2 lost siblings. Eventually, they found their little sister and reconnected with her. Alas, not so with the baby brother. They learned that during the years of separation, he had fallen from his horse while playing polo, broken his neck or back, and died. Robert settled in Ohio, bought farmland my great-uncle still owns, built a house that, though now a ruin, we still visit on occasion, and had 6 children. Story 26. Posting like 10 hours too late. But whatever. My grandfather was a Way-2 veteran. He landed on Normandy +14 as a paratrooper. Then, I'm hazy on the details, this story is 10 years old from when I heard it, and I'm a few drinks in, fought all the way to Berlin. He was known to drink and gamble, but never to a disastrous degree. He was the guy that loaded ammo and carried the stand for the Browning 30 cal. He met the Russians at the river. He was a battle-hardened man and taught his children about the terrors of war. He became staunchly anti-war and preached the horrors to his children. After the war, he became a truck driver, hauling goods cross-country. As part of that, he had to join the union, the Teamsters. Due to the Teamsters' controversial history and ties to criminal elements, he strongly opposed them and was very outspoken about it. Evidently, union members reported his dissatisfaction to leadership. He was seen as a troublemaker. My grandfather was found clubbed to death in the 1980s on the side of the road. His truck still had all its cargo, his wallet still had all his money. Nothing was taken. He wasn't robbed, he was murdered. Police reports confirmed this. I never got to meet him. He died over a decade before I was born. The family immediately blamed the Teamsters. I don't know if that's the truth, but based on all the stories I've heard, and, to be fair, I've heard no opposing versions, I'm convinced. Story 27. My grandpa on my mom's side was an alcoholic who was abusive and assaulted some of his daughters. One of them had to stay home from school so he could take advantage of her. She became pregnant twice, and both babies were stillborn. One time he tried to touch my mom, and she fought him off. He never bothered her again. He knocked all my grandmother's teeth out by the time she was 30, and used to get drunk and wave guns at her. My mom remembers hiding when they argued and covering her ears, waiting for a gunshot. My grandma would send one of her daughters, whichever was available, down the road to ask a neighbor for money. He would take advantage of the girl and give her the cash. My grandmother knew this was happening. She also had an illegitimate child while married to my grandfather, a little girl who got very sick when she was about 2 or 3. My grandfather refused to let her see a doctor. Instead, he put her in the back of a pickup truck in the dead of winter and drove around in the freezing cold. She died as a result. Story 28. When I was a senior in high school, a freshman girl walked up to me and said I was her uncle. I stared at her, and the resemblance to my father was uncanny. At the time, I knew of my sister, who was in 8th grade, and my half-siblings, who were 5 and 8 years older than me. We all had our dad's eyes. This girl had those same eyes. I knew she had to be a relation, so I asked if we could talk the next day. That night, I went home and asked my mom if my dad had more kids. Sure enough, she told me about 2 other half-siblings my dad had when he was 17 and 18. I guess he didn't want us to know. He's always been quiet and doesn't talk about personal things. I think Vietnam had a lot to do with that. A few months later, I brought it up while we were in the car. He wasn't surprised I'd figured it out. He said he thought I would have figured it out sooner. He had left for Vietnam after those kids were born, because their mom wanted nothing to do with him. After the war, he tried to reconnect, but it didn't work out. He knew he had grandkids, but didn't know how many. I told him I'd met all 3 for lunch. He gave me a puzzled look and asked how old they were. They were 3 to 5 years younger than me, and we had gone to the same school. One of them was even in the same friend group as my youngest sister. He thought they'd be much younger. Then he said, "You know that Andrew you hang around with? Ask him who his grandfather is." I freaked out. The next day I asked Andrew, and he named one grandfather but didn't know the other. His mom wouldn't tell him. Story 29. My great-grandfather was said to be a jealous man. One day, while he and my great-grandmother were in town shopping, just walking down the sidewalk, a man catcalled her. He immediately reacted and beat the man unconscious. Apparently, our family was very close to the townspeople, so when word spread that the man's injuries were severe, it was also suggested they leave town immediately, at least until further notice. That night, under the cover of darkness, my great-grandfather and his siblings packed up the family, hopped on a boat, and left. When they arrived at the nearest location, he quickly found work thanks to his skills leading demolition crews on large construction sites. Once he was established, he helped other family members get jobs too. This allowed everyone to stay together. The same was true for the crew. Workers and their families were given nearby lodging in large camps off-site. One day before work, my great-grandmother was standing outside when a few workers passed by. One of them made a comment to her, which she ignored, and then turned to the others, who started laughing before walking off. Somehow, my great-grandfather heard about the incident. He found the worker and beat him. The man survived long enough for his family to find him. There were rumors that some of the crew's families practiced voodoo or other spiritual traditions. The injured worker's family, in particular, was said to have placed a hex on my great-grandfather and his entire family that same night. A week after the incident, my great-grandmother died suddenly. My great-grandfather went to the worker's family and begged for forgiveness. They gave him instructions on how to lift the hex. After performing the ritual, he gathered the family, procured another boat, and returned home.